All right, are we ready?
Yeah.
Awesome. I see there's a couple of people that have joined. Welcome everyone. My name is Aubrey. I'm a member of the IIBA Volunteers for South Africa chapter, obviously, Gauteng region, and I'll be your facilitator for tonight. I'm glad that you guys could join us and looking forward to tonight. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. His name is Thuso Moroole. If you can just hit the next slide for me, Fatu. So who is Thuso? Thuso is a seasoned business and technology leader with nearly two decades of experience driving strategic change across South Africa's capital markets and financial service sectors. His credentials include TOGAF, Certified Business Architect, a CBA, as well as postgraduate qualification culminating in a master's in digital business from Wits Business School. Thuso's professional experience spans leading institutions such as Bidvest Bank, Investec, and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, an active contributor to the business analysis and product ownership community. Thuso is deeply passionate about mentoring and developing the next generation of analysts. He's driven by a strong belief that business analysts who operate with strategic intent do more than deliver requirements. They shape organizational outcomes and long-term value. So this is Thuso, brief introduction. I'm sure you'll get to know him a bit more as he continues with the presentation for tonight. But before we hand over to Thuso, I'd like to just go through a few of our house rules, just to remind you guys. Please stay on mute unless you're invited to speak or you raise your hand and you're acknowledged. Also, make sure your video is off and only the presenter will have his video on. And then the session will take 45 minutes, as always. I'm sure if you are a regular attendant, you'd know that the session takes about 45 minutes. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Just put your questions in the chat box. They will be raised. Even if you are not given a chance to raise your hand, I'm sure someone will still read them for you. Mbali or Bontle will be able to read for you. A recording of the slides will be uploaded on the IIBA SA, the YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, so if you want to rewatch or if you've missed the session, you're able to go to the YouTube channel, and the links will be posted in the chat box as we continue. And we encourage you to stay connected with the IIBA South Africa. There is a link for you if you want to become a business analyst membership with IIBA. There is also a link that gives you a list of the upcoming events. If you're interested in participating in any of the upcoming events, you can follow the link and you'll get some more details on that. And also follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We are active on social media. And yeah, I think that is most of our house rules for tonight. And if you want to present, if you have a special tool or something that you think will contribute to the business analysis community, please get in touch with the IIBA through the professional development at southafrica.iiba.org. I'm not sure if I am forgetting anything else. But I did mention that if you would like to keep in touch, there is links that will also be distributed. Just to add to that, we will have the links that will be posted. We also would like to encourage you to give feedback at the end of the session. Your feedback is valuable to us to help us to shape the tools and session to serve you better. And yeah, if you also would like to get some continuing development unit points for attending the session, please also do shout out, and you'll be given the necessary info. Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Mr. Thuso without taking much more of your time, sir. Please, the virtual floor is yours.
Yep. Thanks, Aubrey, for that colorful introduction. I'm going to take over the screen.
Yes, sir, please do.
Please let me know if it comes up.
Yes, we can see.
Cool. So yeah, I think thanks again, Aubrey, and good evening to all of you in the virtual room. As you heard, I've been in the trenches for a while, so I'm hoping the little that I've learned, one, resonates. Two, you can pick up something that, either helps you grow professionally or offers you a lens through which, you show up going forward. As BAs, you're most qualified professionals to help solve problems in organizations, but I think as most of you will relate, you're very often too late to the party. So yeah, let's maybe skip through that. Here's an all too familiar story, which I think most of you will be familiar with. You brought into a project after things have been decided without your input. And the ask is very clear, help us document the requirements for something you are not a part of. And like I said, I think this is far more common in the BA profession than being asked to actually solve a problem as a BA. And I'll come back to the story a bit later, but I think, I think give it some time, reflect on your own experience, and I don't know, maybe you have a contrasting view of this based on your own experience. But yeah, let's maybe come back to this example a little bit later. So what happens normally, like I've just said, you're not consulted. You must just document how this is going to work. And as part of your analysis, and you documenting whatever it is that you've been asked to do, you find things that basically require rework. So yeah, suddenly in your analysis, you sort of like become a bottleneck. You someone that tends to waste time, you derailing things when people thought they actually on track. And obviously the implications of that is, there's missed impacts, which are probably picked up a bit later. There's rework, which cost a little bit more than having just given BAs the space to do what they're getting employed to do. And you find things that could basically have been avoided. So, and I hope, I hope you guys can relate to this, because that has been my experience for a very long time. And as BAs, we have so many tools in our toolbox that very often we get boxed into sort of like using the same artifacts based on how some of the requests that come through are sort of like being framed. And we've got a whole lot of artifacts that we can basically leverage to to demonstrate a deep understanding of problems. But very often you're not even given that chance. Again, given the fact that someone already comes to you with preconceived ideas of what they actually want from you. So I think these are some of the techniques that I think are very impactful. And some of these, I would say, they're not just tools that help you sort of like, it can take quite a bit of time, for example, to put something like an impact canvas together. But I would say the tools help to guide your questions. So if you have another way of, for example, coming up with an impact canvas to help, project managers, architects sort of like understand the impact a little bit better, you can go that route. But I think there might not be a lot of value in openly sharing some of these artifacts with other colleagues, unless maybe someone asks you to. But I find it's normally very easy, or rather impactful, to sort of like do this kind of analysis on your own, and then you sort of like want, how do I put this? You sort of like then validate those impacts with other teams, SMEs, etc. And again, the kind of questions that guide your approach tend to be a little bit different than someone who just walks into a conversation without having done some of this, groundwork. And some of the other things that one could use is evidence of failure, success. Yeah, I think failure, one, everybody knows that at some point there would have been a sort of like a failure that required a rework. Nobody generally wants to hear those kind of things, but I think there's a bit of soft skills as well that goes with how those things are exposed. So I would say, from wherever you're sitting, whether you doing these kind of, you producing these kind of artifacts to visually demonstrate some of the things that stakeholders wouldn't necessarily pick up front, or whether it's just to guide how you interrogate impacts. I think just do the work, let it show its value, and I think organically your value as a BA will sort of like be elevated. There's something else that I think we shy away from, which is volunteering for strategic stretch assignments. How many times have you attended meetings, and at the end of it, it's not clear who's doing what? And in the next meeting, we sort of like all scrambling around trying to figure out, oh, actually, where did we leave this? And I think here is where you can sort of like help introduce some structured thinking approaches. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying do extra admin work. I'm not saying take on everything just so that you can look busy. But I think it's about building capabilities in areas that are adjacent to strategic work. So what do I mean by that? Products, as an example, when you got new products being launched, architectures are generally very close, for example, to the strategic work before it actually hits BA domains. Business case work, work that requires you to look at operating models that new products may introduce, as an example. That's where conversations about approaches to solving problems actually happen. So look at ownership gaps as a growth opportunity. Take initiative, create those artifacts that will get you invited. And again, these things can be quite a lot of work. So I'm not expecting you to spend a bit of time on this, because I'll show you as an example now. I think in the next slide. Yeah. So here, this is an example of an impact kind of assessment or impact canvas that I was referring to a little bit earlier. This can be time consuming to try and put together. It doesn't have to be this way. Again, the idea is to guide the kind of questions that you put across in conversations with key stakeholders. But I had to put it in here just to demonstrate what I meant. It's something you can put for yourself on a piece of paper and again validate some of those impacts with SMEs from other teams. And what I've tried to do here as well is to maybe just demonstrate what I mean. For example, in a classic example where you're onboarding a new product, this is your whole ecosystem as an example of products and let's say teams. You've identified some impacts. You're not really sure, but you foresee that these are the kind of things that will be impacted in the various domains. So again, validate these impacts with SMEs and those other teams without having to spend an hour putting something like this together, because I mean, I'm appreciative of the fact that this takes time to do. So it's here because I didn't just want to speak and theorize. I wanted to demonstrate what I meant by an example. But again, just plot it on a piece of paper for yourself if that makes things easier. I think it's easier that way. And then the next section for me just talks about what I call the disconnect problem. And what do I mean by that? It's important to understand how your work connects to strategy. So what often happens is that you've got, I've listed some examples here whereby the leadership is talking about things like market expansion. They're talking about optimizing costs, digital transformation, regulatory impacts of whatever new regulation has, the impact that it has on the business. You on the ground as the BA, on the other hand, you're talking about user stories, you planning for the next sprint plan, you're talking about mappings between various systems, you're talking about process maps, test cases and stuff like that. Now, you automatically assume that your work contributes to achieving some strategy. But very often there isn't a clear connect of how your work connects to what actually the strategic objectives are. And very often when you ask someone who's pushing heavily for deliverables, when you ask them like, okay, what is the point of this? What are we actually trying to achieve? You're going to get answers like, for example, it's a number one project on the scorecard. It's what the leadership wants, as an example. So the assumption being that someone else is handling that sort of like strategic alignment that is supposed to be visible and somehow traceable in the work that is being delivered on the ground by yourself as a BA. So the outcome then becomes a siloed kind of mentality where you assume that you're doing stuff that moves the strategic needle, but there's actually nothing that connects your work to whatever it is that the objectives may be. So some of the things that I think, like I mentioned earlier, are quite key is it's important to understand how your work connects to the overall strategy. And there's many ways in which you can try and map out how that works. I mentioned earlier on the quality of questions that you ask. So if you apply a strategic business analysis lens, the quality of your questions demonstrate the non-siloed kind of focus. You start to really poke on things like value, like why am I doing this? What value is being achieved, or what value are we going to achieve by all this work that I'm doing? Um, and that segues nicely into the next part about value stream awareness. And um, value stream awareness is just understanding end to end how you move from focusing too much on systems to understanding the flow of value. And I know this is one topic that often confuse colleagues. You find people talking about processes and systems, for example, to describe value streams. And yes, end-to-end value delivery has got IT-enabled business processes and systems powering that whole cycle of value delivery. But I think very often what happens is you lose stakeholders when you overly focus on systems jargon. So the business vocabulary for us as BAs is quite key to, sort of like step out of the low level details a little bit and sort of like have an overarching view, or rather what's commonly called a helicopter view of what's actually happening. Why are we doing what we're doing? And I think that's quite important for us to do as BAs, and get out of the siloed focus kind of approach. The other thing is just the decision traceability, which I think is often overlooked. I mean, how often have we circled back to a project that was abandoned a few years ago and nobody remembers why? People dig through emails to figure out, like, where did we end this thing, and why was it abandoned? And you start seeing this cycle of reinventing the wheel because, one, either people with the knowledge left, two, nobody actually really bothered to take a log of, what actually were we trying to achieve, what constraints did we encounter, and what were some of the trade-offs, and why did we actually stop doing this? So you by being able to sort of like do this kind of work, capturing why decisions were made, you indirectly become a custodian of organizational memory, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because you quickly able to guide conversations and not get into derailed kind of like figuring out where people are just all over the place. So it's, again, as business analysis, as business analysts, our role is to solve problems, but our role is also to sort of like guide conversations when there's no structure. We are just all over the place, nothing is documented, and that is why you often find you know solutions that have been delivered, but every now and then they fail and nobody knows why. And again, the person who created this thing left, there was zero documentation. So I think some of these artifacts become very important from that perspective. Um, and then another thing is that one could use to sort of like bridge that gap is capability impact mapping. And again, this is sort of like the language that business leaders and architects speak. Um, they talk about customer management as opposed to CRM, for example. Again, moving away a little bit from systems. So moving conversations, from systems to what capabilities are we actually trying to build here? But I'm also cognizant of the fact that you need either very mature architectural practices to be able to do some of these things, or at least some sort of a baseline architecture in place to be able to to perform this kind of impact mapping that are just referred to here. But if you consider that enterprise architecture, for example, is how organizations align business strategies with IT capabilities, you then don't have a choice but to conclude that as a BA, it's important to start exposing yourself to some of these concepts because they are actually, the bedrock of business vocabulary, which I think becomes very important if you are trying to understand just how your work connects to strategy. And yeah, as I say there, your requirements are not just requirements. There's an underlying reason why you're doing those requirements, and there's many ways to connect them back to why you're doing what you're doing. But very often that doesn't exist because someone assumes someone else is doing it or someone else did it. At least that's been, my experience. So what I've tried to do here, again, to sort of like avoid theorizing a lot. Sorry, this slide is actually courtesy of Bizbok. What I've tried to do here, I mentioned value streams and I mentioned capabilities. What I'm showing here right now at the top here is what is typically called a value stream, and it's enabled by various capabilities, as you can see below here. And I'm trying to demonstrate this in an effort to sort of like bring some of these concepts together. For example, you see here there's talk of customer management as an example. So that means that we're talking about some capability that has to look after customers. As BAs, you would typically be talking about a CRM system or any other system that stores customer data. But this perspective takes you up a level from discussing systems to talking about capabilities. Another one is message management. And an example there is some sort of a back-end application that's probably sending emails or SMS, whatever, to tell you as a client what's the status of your request to acquire a loan. And then you've got, what other one is there? Let's say work queue management. That speaks to sort of like your RPA, which is typically done by something like your Power Automate, for example, which moves an application for a loan through some sort of a workflow, that checks at a certain status is this, then it needs to move to another team, whatever. And this perspective kind of like demonstrate that your value stream at the top here it depicts an end-to-end perspective of what happens from the point as an organization you receive an application for a loan. There are all these capabilities that touches. So those are the things that are enabling. Sorry, those are the capabilities that are enabling this particular stage, and all the way to the end when actually the loan is being issued. And obviously, the value that is then coming out of this for a customer is actually money going into the customer's bank account. So I think that's sort of like the way to think about this. And again, moving away a little bit from systems talk. And then the next section for me speaks about the influence shift. So going back to the example that I started off with earlier on, and I'm pretty sure this is familiar, or rather it resonates. Someone will say, we just need a BA to help us document this, which to me says that I'm just taking orders here. I don't have to apply myself. I don't have to figure out whether this is the right solution to the problem. I'm being told to just document it. So I must just document. And I think, and I don't know if maybe it's the structure of organizations we work for or what drives that, but I think most BAs will sit in this kind of like quadrant. But if you go back to what your role is as a BA, is to solve problems, and maybe a slightly controversial perspective, at least according to me, is that documentation or artifacts are actually just byproducts of the craft. It's things that you produce as part of solving the problem. So you are not just producing documents to support some governance process. I have a problem. I need you to help me solve it. That, for me, lends a little bit better than asking me for a documentation, because what you are asking me in this context is dig into your entire toolbox as a BA, figure out which tools are more appropriate for the problem that I have. And whereas, if you're asking me to document something, it's as if as a stakeholder, you've sort of like already decided what artifacts you want, because some stakeholders will even tell you, we just need a process map for this. But yes, part of the job is to produce those kind of things. But what exactly is the problem? If you had told me that you need me to help you solve a problem, I may have ended up with something else, maybe UML diagrams, sequence or use case diagrams or whatever. Or, and again, depending on the maturity of your organization, value stream map, which shows you which capabilities you sort of like impacting as part of what you're trying to do. And I could have even taken it a step further and given you a heat map that shows you which capabilities you're actually going to be impacting with whatever proposal that you have in mind. And as a decision maker, you realize, actually, this capability is not as important as another capability, which is being developed in another initiative where, I don't know, for example, you're focusing on creating new capabilities, new markets, whatever, to get a competitive edge, etc. So that could have been how I could have solved the problem and also helped you figure out, or rather make better decisions based on the kind of data you suddenly have in front of you. So again, where you want to be as a BA is here, where you sort of like you have the potential to shape direction. You are not focused on one project. You are aware of what's happening throughout the organization, and you are sort of like able to influence decisions because you get invited to conversations before things have been decided. So yeah, I think what are some of the things that you could do to get to this point? In my perspective, cross silo impact radar, it syncs nicely with the lightweight impact canvas that I mentioned earlier. Again, this is not project focused, it's enterprise wide. So it gives you that sort of like, you know, it removes boundaries because you're able to figure out what's needed there without necessarily needing to go into too much detail. You just understand enough to guide your own analysis. Another thing that one could do, which I've recently realized is actually quite important, is to build architect alliances. So this the relationship between business analysts and architects, it's actually a very, what's the word? It's a symbiotic kind of relationship that elevates both roles. So it creates nice synergies that simplify problem solving. This further positions you as the bridge between strategy, between business and architecture. And it helps you identify misalignments very early. It answers questions that have a lot of costly assumptions built into them by people who are not necessarily into the low level details as you may be as a BA, for example. And from that perspective, you then able to sort of like identify risks a little bit earlier so that they can then be avoided. The other thing is being able to tell stories. Get comfortable with presentations, get comfortable with crafting them, get comfortable talking through them. And most importantly, I think tailoring your message to your audience is something that I think is underrated. In my line of work, for example, I have a diverse stakeholders in the financial services sector. All of them have different interests when a change is being introduced in the market. So I cannot bring detailed API messaging flows to a conversation where you have stakeholders who are looking after, let's say, treasury functions in a bank, for example. Their interest is more around understanding the impacts to liquidity or capital adequacy or, I don't know, regulatory compliance as an example. So an ability to be able to tailor your messaging according to whoever you're talking to is quite important, so that you can guide decisions. You can be able to guide stakeholders to decisions without necessarily prescribing to them what you think is is the best solution according to you, because after all, it ends up being your perspective. And yeah, this brings me to a tech leadership meetup that I attended recently. I think it was 2 months ago. There was a guy there. His name was Adit Mita. he spent some time essentially describing the concept of what he called a pseudo CTO. And this slide, I think it was somewhere towards the end of his presentation. And most of what he said throughout the presentation resonated. And I think, yeah, if you guys look at some of these things, it's so basically what was described as a pseudo CTO is in many ways a business analyst who's operating at full strategic maturity, um, solving complex problems, not just documenting requirements. They have trust capital in that they get invited to difficult conversations. You don't even carry a title that says you're very senior, but you've got kind of like influence that that is taken seriously when you're being asked to help, solve problems. So I thought, yeah, this slide was pretty much relevant because this guy was talking about a pseudo CTO. But I mean, if you look at all these things again, it's pretty much what BAs do. You reduce misinterpretation, which is quite key for stakeholders to make decisions and understand what exactly is the problem, what are we solving, despite the underuse of our skills that I mentioned earlier. And then I think maybe just bringing it all together. I may have presented 3 different problems, but I think we can all see that it's actually one problem. And we are not there when things are being decided. Therefore, the work that you do, yeah, it can be connected to the bigger picture. And it then reinforces this perception that you must just be creating documents. And yeah, I think like I said earlier on, I have a problem with the perception that BAs must just be producing documents to help solve, not even solve problems. It's to document stuff so that someone can take it to some governance forum and say, yeah, we did document requirements. Yes, we do have some test cases linked to them. It becomes sort of like a tick box to some governance process. And yeah, I think as BAs, let's break that cycle and try to advocate for work that that demonstrate an ability for BAs to, I guess, to have some sort of strategic impact. Where am I? Sorry. Yeah, I think that's the end of the slide.
Awesome.
I don't know if there are questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thuso. This was a very informative, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of people who might even at this point feel like they're in that stage where they feel like they are only invited to the table once things are starting to go sideways, or those that feel like they're not even getting recognition at all as business analysts to even be called to the table. So I'm sure this will be very helpful. I think especially where you outline what I would say is ways to actually get yourself to be seen as a business analyst, but not only that, but also as a business strategic partner. I think these are going to be very helpful. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'd like to now open the floor for questions for everyone who has questions. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Buntle, do you mind just reading some of those questions and perhaps too, so you can try to answer those questions for us?
Hi, Audrey. Hi, Aubrey. Hi, Thuso. So one question that we have here comes from Robert Snyder. He says, he says, does the BA want to unwind past decisions?
Sorry, does the BA
want to unwind past decisions?
So I think I mean, you sort of like then stepping into political kind of domains. But I think as a BA, your task, or rather your your objective in that context, is to demonstrate that decisions were made, yes, but there's all this rework that now needs to happen on the back of the fact that you were not involved. So I think going forward, there's an appreciation for bringing you into conversations a little bit earlier to avoid a repeat of what has happened. And yeah, I think that's the best way to frame that. And I think if you have stakeholders who really do pay attention and care about improving delivery and not having to repeat the same mistakes, I suspect they will listen.
Okay. And does the BA want to euthanize, I hope I read that word correctly, certain documentation telling the team you are over documenting?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Just say that again.
Does the BA want to euthanize certain documentation telling the team you are over documenting?
Euthanize certain. I don't think you can necessarily say one is over documenting, right? Because, like I said earlier on, documentation is part and parcel of the craft. It's part of solving the problem. You can't get away from documentation. I think, yeah, the perception that you are over documenting, I think, is inaccurate. I don't think you can have how do I put this? I think documentation is key. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. So if I can just also assist Buntle there, I think the question is coming that the questions that are coming from Robert, they seem more like rhetorical questions, because if you he's saying that if there are a few different points of view the BA can take in this situation. So the first one being that of that's the BA want to unwind past decisions, that's the BA want to. So I think it's more of what kind of a view does the BA take in any situation, just given what you were saying. Yeah, he is also confirming that it's mostly rhetorical, but I think there is also some good things to just think about from that as a business analyst, because I think at the end of the day it comes down to the approach and the mindset. Now, there is one question that comes from Fatu. It says, how does one balance influencing decisions in an environment where business analysts are largely seen as documenters and often thrown into projects that are already in flight and solutions and decisions already pre-selected? So how do you balance, the influencing decisions in such an environment?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly the problem that I've been talking about throughout. And I so this is also as much as as much a stakeholder problem as it is also sort of like a cultural issue in an organization. And as I think we all know, it's very difficult to change culture in an organization without, you know, intentionally doing certain things that highlight that some of these practices are actually not working. And yeah, it's not, there's no silver bullet, you know, but I think it's about you as someone who recognizes the need to highlight some of these practices that are not necessarily serving the organization, and hope that at some point a stakeholder who has power will eventually listen. Because yeah, I mean, ultimately it's, as a BA, and this has always been my problem, you don't necessarily have the power to influence which direction is being taken. You just told what to do, and some of the things that you're being told to do, it's individuals who don't even understand the practice of business analysis, and they want to tell you, as an example, just keep the requirements high level. Who's accountable at the end of the day when things fall apart? So it's those kind of conversations, and that's why I keep reiterating that some of these can be a little bit political. And yeah, I guess it's also just about your soft skills, how you approach some of these conversations. You have to be cognizant of where you are in the organization, or rather in the food chain.
Awesome. Thanks, Thuso. I hope that's a helpful answer to the person who asked. So there's another question that says, would you say then that a business analyst is a technology strategist who operates from a business lens perspective? Would you say that?
I would say it's all about awareness. It's about how you perceive yourself. Someone else might just be comfortable to just take instructions and document stuff, but I think if you see your work bigger than just requirements, and you're intentional about how you show up in discussions, in conflicts, I think then yes, you sort of like see yourself as sort of like someone who's kind of like punching above their weight.
All right, cool. Okay, so I think Robert is on fire. So I have one question that I wanted to ask you. So would you say that the problem of not being involved or included in the project from the beginning is a result of not being visible as a BA, like your work not being seen or not being known about? Or would you say that it's just the blind spots in the business and how they operate or how they do things?
I think it's based on how the craft of business analysis is being perceived in the organization. Some leaders value business analysis work, and they'll give it the kind of space, or rather seat, in key conversations. And some just won't, because like I said, we've got this solution, just help us document. You don't have a say.
All right. Cool. Thanks again, Thuso. So there's a comment there from Lucy. Says, I would say BA can use tech to enable business value. Yeah, I think that's essentially what business analysts do in a business. I'm not seeing any more questions. Just want to give one more opportunity if there are any questions, even if you want to raise your hand to speak or say what you would like to ask. We have about 2 minutes to close the session for tonight. Sorry, too. So I'm just checking the chats. I assume that means everyone is satisfied or is happy with the answers given and the questions which were asked. Again, Thuso, okay, sorry, there's a question that came in. It says, good tips for a BA that's undervalued, but what's the root cause of the issue? Is it culture or an organizational structure? So if a BA is undervalued, it sounds almost similar to what I've asked, but what's your take on that, Thuso?
If a BA is undervalued?
Yeah, what is the root cause of that issue? Is it culture or an organizational structure issue?
I think it could be a combination of all of them, because the fact that you are undervalued means that someone has sort of like, they have perceptions of your impact to the deliverables. So as an example, there's a project. We don't need to bring Aubrey to the conversation now. Let's just agree what this direction is, and we'll bring him later. So I think it could be a combination of factors that that lead to that that undervaluing of a BA. But I would say, like I said earlier on, do the work, let it show its value, and you will get invited to conversations. You will be seen as valuable, because it's, yeah, if you're just going to sit back and say I'm undervalued anyway, it's not really helping you. It's not helping your craft. And if you move to another organization, you might find that it's worse than where you've been. So I think in the environment you in, just start maybe doing one or two things that help you demonstrate value. And yeah, I mean, I know it's difficult to change human beings' perceptions of anything, especially of you, but I think it's up to you, to demonstrate that you are more valuable. And the other side to it is, you might move to an organization that actually values BAs, but I mean, how are you going to know? Because you're only going to find out once you're there whether you really valued as a BA or not. So either way, the onus is on you to put in the work and demonstrate value.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. So it's a very helpful advice. I think our natural inclination is probably just to sit back and say, well, it doesn't matter. They're not going to recognize me even if I try. But I think to say that you need to put in the work and to make sure it has value, it's a very important thing and a very important lesson, I think, to take from this. So thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of the session. It's already 2 minutes past 8. Thank you so much once again, Thuso. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you making your time to come and share with us about your knowledge and just what you have learned throughout your time in the industry. And to our attendees, thank you so much. I appreciate your time as well, guys. Thank you for showing up every week. And yeah, for participating, with those questions and those comments. Robert, we see you. Thank you, even for those attending from far. I see you've got people coming from Toronto. So thank you, guys. Okay, so just to remind you that we do have a couple of links that have been shared with you guys. If you want to be a member of the IIBA, please visit the link. It's in the chat. If you also would like to know about our upcoming events, there's a link as well. Please visit the link. And don't forget, this session will also be on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, and follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on social media platforms. Make sure that you keep in touch. And yeah, if you have a very helpful, if you believe you have a very helpful tool or technique that you'd like to share with us, please get in touch with the IIBA South Africa. We would definitely appreciate you getting in touch with us. And yeah, last one, don't forget to give us feedback. It's very important to us and valuable as well to help us shape this platform to best serve you well. Again, I'd like to thank you guys, and yeah, thank you for joining us, and looking forward to joining you the next time when we have another session.
Thank you, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Thanks, Thuso. And also remember our tools and techniques next week, Thursday. And we will see you in the next, remember our Lean Coffee, which is Wednesday. And then we'll see you in the next tools and techniques. Thanks all.
Awesome. Cool. Afatu, can we stay behind with the team just for a minute?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool, guys. I think everyone is out of the group. Yeah, I wanted to